You know, when we think about history, our minds almost always jump to kings and queens and these massive empires, right? But what if I told you that one of Africa's most fascinating civilizations built a complex, thriving society without any of them? Well, today we're going to dive into the incredible and often untold history of the Igbo people.
And that brings us to a really fundamental question, one that kind of challenges how we look at all of history. Does a civilization actually need a king to be successful? That's the big puzzle we're going to explore.
To answer that, we're looking at the Igbo people. Their story is just this powerful, often overlooked alternative to the top-down power structures we're all so familiar with. What's so interesting is that their origins are a bit of a mystery. They don't trace back to one single founder, which you'll see is a huge clue about their culture.
And this quote, wow, it just nails it. Unlike, say, the Romans with their Romulus and Remus story, the Igbo identity wasn't built around one central myth. Nope, it was a whole bunch of different narratives that came together, like a mosaic, which perfectly reflects their decentralized nature. And we know they have incredibly deep roots. Archaeology shows a thriving society going back thousands of years.
So, the big question is, how do they pull it off? Let's jump into our first section and really understand the architecture of their government. How exactly did the Igbo rule without a ruler?
I really want you to just let that sink in for a moment. No emperor, no royal bloodline passing down power, no single person calling all the shots. And this wasn't chaos, not at all. It was a highly organized system built on a completely different idea of power.
Okay, let's really get into this because this slide breaks it down perfectly. On one side, you've got that familiar pyramid shape, right? Power's at the top, flows down. But the Igbo system, it was a network. Power came from the people, through agreement and consensus. And leadership, well, that was something you earned through respect and what you did for your community. It wasn't something you were just born into.
So how did that network actually work day to day? Well, check this out. Power was spread out across a bunch of different groups. You had councils of elders for their wisdom, you had age groups that created these lifelong bonds and shared duties, and then you had community assemblies where pretty much everyone got to have a say. The implication of this is huge. It created this amazing system of checks and balances that stopped any one person or group from getting too powerful. It was a society built for individual freedom and participation.
Of course, a society is so much more than just its politics. So let's explore the other pillars that held up Igbo civilization, their economy, their incredible art, and their unique spiritual worldview.
And let me tell you, the Igbo weren't just socially advanced. They were unbelievably innovative and entrepreneurial. Farming was the backbone for sure, and yams were way more than just food. They were a symbol of wealth and high status. Their trade networks were huge and bustling. And get this, the markets were often run by women, which gave them a ton of economic power. And on top of all that, they were master craftspeople, especially with metalworking.
Now, to really get inside the Igbo mindset, you have to understand this concept of chi. This wasn't some distant god up in the sky. It was seen as a personal spiritual force, a divine spark inside every single person that helped guide their path in life. It's a really individualistic, yet deeply spiritual idea.
And this idea of chi fits into a much bigger picture. Ancestors weren't just memories. They were seen as active, present members of the community. And above all else, everything was about balance, finding harmony between people, the natural world, and the spirit world. Art, masks, incredible festivals, these weren't just for show. They were the practical tools they used to maintain that essential harmony.
But this unique and balanced world was about to face its greatest test. The arrival of European powers marked a dramatic and deeply disruptive turning point in Igbo history. This quote, right here, gets to the absolute heart of the problem. British administrators showed up with this rigid, one-size-fits-all idea of how a society should work. They were looking for a king to deal with, a single chief they could control. And when they couldn't find one, the entire Igbo system was just completely incomprehensible to them.
And what happened next is one of the most jarring parts of this story. Since they couldn't work with the system that was already there, the colonial administration just imposed their own. They literally created a new class of leaders, appointing certain men as warrant chiefs and giving them an artificial power that just shattered the traditional way of life.
You can see the escalation right here on this timeline. This new forced hierarchy created all kinds of conflict. But the Igbo people did not just take this line down. In 1929, in this incredible show of strength, thousands of women, The very same people who held so much economic influence organized a massive protest against colonial rule. It became known as the Women's War, and it's one of the most important anti-colonial movements in all of African history.
But despite all that disruption, the story doesn't end there. Not even close. The Igbo people proved to be unbelievably resilient. They adapted, they rebuilt, and they evolved right into the modern world.
Today, that same spirit of self-determination is channeled into a world-renowned entrepreneurial drive and a really deep commitment to education. You can find people of Igbo heritage making huge impacts in business, in tech, and in universities all across the globe. But even with all that modern success, it's still anchored by these incredibly strong community ties and a massive sense of pride in their culture.
So what we see now is this vibrant, living culture. It's not some relic sitting in a museum. It's a dynamic blend of ancient traditions and modern innovation. It's a story that is still being written every single day. And that brings us right back to where we started. Why is this incredible history so often left out of the textbooks? Well, it's because it totally messes with the standard story we're all told. It proves that there are other ways to build a complex, successful, and sophisticated civilization. So, what's the lasting lesson here? The Igbo story shows us that human society is way more creative and diverse than our history books often let on. It's a powerful reminder that real power can come from the community, and that a culture's greatest strength is its ability to bounce back, to be resilient, even in the face of massive change.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. In a world that's still struggling with big questions about power, about governance, and about community, what can a kingless past teach our future? That's a question worth chewing on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.